Hi, I'm Kevin A. Davis with InkPub, INKDPUB.com. We have some open subs right now for Hidden Villains Duos, Rebels, and Non-Corporeal 4. We will be taking some pitches for fantasy, horror, lit RPG, and LGBTQ plus nonfiction over the next few months. Today, I have Sara Jordan-Heintz with me, who is a author and editor, and most prominently in my world, editor behind the shadows. So, welcome, Sara. Let's start off talking about your book before we get into anything editorial. Let's go with your author side and let's talk about your book and
Sure.
what's it about.
Um, I've actually written a few books. My latest and probably my largest work to date is a biography slash true crime story on prominent journalist Dorothy Kilgallen. So it's called The Incredible Life and Mysterious Death of Dorothy Kilgallen. It all began for me back in 2006 when I wrote a Midwest Today magazine article about Dorothy's life and death and decided it was time to put out a book, which I did in late 2023.
Good. And it's doing well. Um,
It is. It is. And, there's been a handful of authors through the years, and I'm one of them. And so I think people really trust the information I have, her journalism, television work, and what's my line, just a really fascinating woman. So I have a background in history, so it's really, right up my alley to pursue biographies.
right. History and journalism. You
Yes.
you have a lot of journalist work out there, I noticed. So
Yes.
where can we find your book?
It's on Amazon. It's a paperback and ebook. It's also an Audible. So I have an audiobook that's doing really well as well. And I also have a website, DorothyKilgallen.net. And you can also find out more about books at pageturnerbooks.biz. This is my prior book. It's all about movie stars from the Midwest. I'm based in Iowa, so they're all kind of your classic golden age stars. Um, so I have that. Um, and as you know, I'm also a newspaper reporter, have a background writing for daily and weekly newspapers here in Iowa.
Yep, yep. Now we're going to be putting up some of those links in the on the YouTube page so that people can get right to that because I don't want it's hard to other than like a 7 letter URL, it's pretty hard to remember all those things. So we'll make sure we get those up there. So are you working on another novel now?
I am not working on any book project as of yet, but I do write short stories. I've been in 4 inked anthologies as an author, and then of course I've edited the 3 for Behind the Shadows. So what I'm kind of doing now is flash fiction. If I see open submission calls for kind of those 100-word stories, 500-word stories, that's where I can maybe spend an hour or afternoon kind of tinkering around. And so I have some calls for submissions I've been sending out, but I feel like I've done pretty well this year. I'm in the Hidden Villains Criminals this year, the Non-Corporeal 3. I'm also in Sea of Monsters anthology, and then also Dark Descent, which was published in the UK. So I feel like I'm getting kind of caught up in stories that I'd had,
Okay.
in my to be published folder. So now I have to kind of generate some new stuff.
All right. All right. Yeah, these flash fiction I just can't do it. I've tried, and that's an art form in itself. There was a lady that had a whole book of them, and they were like amazing when I was going through them because it takes a real art form to get that whole piece twisted into like 100 words, 200 words, and it's like for me that's outside my boundary. I
Yeah, I enjoyed the challenge.
yeah, I gotta that and poetry just not my wick, and I'll run off on a long piece before I get there. All right, so let's talk about some of your editorial because on top of journalism, which you've been doing for a long time, and authoring the novels, you're an editor and you do not only my anthologies, but you edit outside work and other stuff. So let's talk a little bit about what you're presently working on.
Sure. My husband Andy Hines and my father Larry Jordan are also writers, so I kind of began with editing their book projects through the years. not really in a paid capacity, right? And then Inked really changed that. That was a wonderful opportunity you gave me, Kevin, and I'm very fortunate with that because through that association, Arash Resvin reached out to me. He's been working on quite a prolific grimdark novel, Zai Descent, and I think it'll be a three-part series. So I edited his first book earlier this summer. It's about 700 pages. And that's still kind of be decided on, I think, the actual publishing date. But I'm very excited to have been a part of that. And I have heard back from some other anthology alumni who I think might consider me in the future for editing some of their works. But it's very competitive. It's very hard to kind of edge out with people who have been doing this for decades or have really professional websites. So far, it's just been kind of word of mouth. But I am what I call myself a work from home mom. I'm a full-time writer, editor, mother, for, freelancing. So if people are interested in reaching out to me, big or small for a project, I can usually fit that in pretty well to my schedule.
Yeah, yeah, good. And editing is well, anything creative in today's world with AI is so much more difficult because um, some really, and I have looked at some of these and tested them, and there are some pretty horrible systems up there as far as, I mean, Grammarly started it, with the most questionable changes ever suggested, um, when you'd run it through, but it is continuing and they're pitching it high. So a lot of new authors jump there. But if you don't have a basis in grammar, you won't even know that you're making some huge mistakes. Luckily, when I tested it, had enough grammar in my background that I could be like, that's really cringy. That seems wrong. So yeah, I'd say the editing market, is definitely a difficult spot, but well worth it. A good editor will totally change up your profile of what you're writing. It's huge. So of your um, past projects, and some of your future pieces. What do you get most excited about? What stirs you the most? Is it the journalism? Is it your own novels? Is it the anthologies? Is it editing a 700-page tome? What are the things that get you most excited?
Well, I have a degree in American Studies and History, so I love kind of Americana topics. I'm actually working on an article right now for Minnesota Monthly, and it's to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Pillsbury Doughboy. Poppin' Fretch, that's his real name. So I love that kind of whimsical, those sentimental connections people have with popular culture. It just always really has fascinated me. So I love that from the news perspective, but then I also love kind of escaping into worlds that I create. I'm very inspired by film noir and Twilight Zone. If I can just for a second plug, Submitted for Your Approval came out about a decade ago.
Mhm.
And my story, A Day Saved is a Day Earned, which deals with kind of some time travel and a guardian angel, it makes up about a third of the book. And I wrote this in college, and I was so excited for this to come out because it was edited by Anne Serling, Rod Serling's daughter. So this was really my first published fictional story. And so I felt like that was a great start to, I think, what has kind of come since.
Okay. So for people who don't know the submitted for approval, and the Sterling names, where does that come from?
So Anne Serling's father was Rod Serling, creator and narrator of The Twilight Zone, which ran on CBS from 1959 to 1964. And it's just a huge inspiration for me. I know we were going to talk a little bit about, me as an editor, what I look for, and I love stories set in that era. I love a good period piece. I'm not against gore or violence. I take all of that into consideration when I'm selecting stories, but I do love a psychological component where you can get inside someone's head. I think of the Twilight Zone episode where a man woke up one day and no one knew who he was. His family didn't know him. No one knew him at the office. Where would you go? I mean, what recourse do you have? It wasn't visually frightening per se,
Right.
but just thinking, where would you go in that situation? What do you do when it's like you against everyone else? And so I love that kind of psychological
Yep.
messing with your mind a little bit.
Yeah. And that is, we are our connections, whether we want to admit it some days or not. It is the connections that we build in our life that we are. And when you lose all that, you've lost pretty much you. So yeah, Twilight Zone gets spooky. Nice stuff. So what do you like to read? What are you reading?
For as much as I like to write stories that are, spooky, speculative, I'm a big cozy mystery reader. Love cozies. I love Murder, She Wrote. I grew up on that. I love Lauren Berenson and Julianne Lindsay and Krista Davis. So I always have a cozy book at my bedside, particularly any kind of Halloween tie-ins. I love to read those year round.
Okay, yeah. I mean, they definitely, hit that little spot of being warm and fuzzy, but at the same time fully engaging. So
Mhm.
great, great reads. Um, so of your reading past year, or wherever you want to pick, um, recommend a book, something that you really struck you as you were reading.
Sure, this may have been a little over a year ago, but Invisible Women was a wonderful book because it's great for both ghost believers and skeptics because these two authors, Leanne and Andrea, took well-known stories, perhaps Sarah Winchester, Lizzie Borden, lesser-known women, and talking about the women behind the stories, kind of cutting through myths and misogyny and the woman scorned and there's always vengeance and kind of trying to what would you say, kind of take apart fact from fiction and get to the heart of who these women were in real life and how kind of society likes to make things to be a certain narrative that maybe just wasn't in real life. So it's a really fascinating look at how women go on in the afterlife, kind of, and what their legacies are. And they kind of deconstruct some of those urban legends and ghost stories and boil it down into who these women really were.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's a good parallel to the actual nature of our society, which it is try to make women invisible. So
Yes, it's a really great read, whether you're really into ghost stuff or kind of feminist studies or however you want to hit it. It's really fascinating.
that does sound interesting. All right. So when you're there might be some authors out here, peeking in at these interviews, and if they're trying to get into one of the anthologies that you're curating, any tips for them? Something that you could, say, here's something to try that, might catch my eye.
Sure. I mean, as I briefly mentioned earlier, I do love period pieces, although that's not a requirement. I think a story should be pretty clean and free of typos, to kind of beat out perhaps dozens or hundreds of other submissions. I like to see them being, clean and having some real consideration put in there, a good grasp of the English language. I like those psychological elements too. And I think stories that align well with the theme, our latest one, The Dark Secrets, I felt like I wanted the stories to have at least one dark secret, whether we ever really know what it is or not. So if you really hit the nail on the head for the theme, I'm definitely going to give that a lot more consideration.
Okay, good. Because there are, a lot of, anthologies out there that don't have, too strong of a hit as far as what they're exactly looking for. And then there's other ones that are like, we're looking for orangutans that only eat soup. And you're like,
Yeah,
wow, that is specific. Um,
yeah, specific. Yeah.
and, for that, it's good to know. I always suggest that the, writers, because like even on Behind the Shadows, if you can get up and get the little read through and read that first story, find out what Sarah likes, because that helps, identify, is that, someone who's looking for, um, you know, certain feels to the story. All right,
Mhm.
I'm going to close up here, but is there anything else that you want to mention that you have coming up that you'd like to highlight, or have we covered everything?
I think we've covered it pretty well. In Iowa, it's newspaper awards season coming up next month. So I'm hoping to submit my work. I've won for personality features, business. I won outstanding young journalist in 2018. So I have that kind of competitive streak, not really for sports, but with my writing. And of course, always promoting my book on Dorothy. This November will be the 60th anniversary of her death in 1965. And it's great for people interested in the Kennedy assassination too, as it's a pretty deep thread that runs through my book.
Okay. All right. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for coming out and taking a minute with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again.